A basic question might be today, why does the Strait of Hormuz matter? Why does that particular route, why has it become so critical to every economy that consumes fossil fuel? What is so important about one small waterway out of the Middle East that controls literally the economies of every modern civilization today? We've got oil in Russia, we've got oil in South America, we've got oil in the United States. We have oil everywhere. What is it about the Middle East that is got everything so out of economic whack? Well, let's think about that. When we think about an economy, we think about raw materials and supplies. There's only certain places we can get copper, only certain places we can get lithium, only certain places that gold exists. There's only certain places raw material and natural resources exist. And those natural resources are then mined and then delivered to customers all over the world. And most of the times, the customer that uses the product is not in the same place where those natural resources exist. As it turns out, the Middle East is geologically one of the richest areas of the world in terms of fossil fuels, oil, and natural gas. Unfortunately, the Strait of Hormuz is one of the easiest ways to get that oil out of that particular Middle East geographical area to global consumers all over the world, including the United States. So we have a discourse. The discourse is where the oil is not the best place to be in terms of political stability, military, geopolitical interest, government normalcy. Every country over there has a different way of doing things, so there's not a singular kind of a agreed upon way to do business. It's very sensitive. It's hundreds, if not thousands of years of prior ways of doing things, prior ways of business, prior ways of running their country, religion, ideology, all that's in place. So regardless of what happens, unless there is a direct effort to move oil out of the Strait of Hormuz in one fashion or another, besides waterborne vessels, that will become the jugular vein for the entire global economy for the foreseeable future. Now, don't misunderstand me. They're already making provisions to go different routes across land, to go to other oceans and try to get waterborne ports. Because at the end of the day, it's all going to be on waterborne vessels traveling all over the world to get that oil dispersed to their customers. And guess what? Whether you sell vegetables and watermelons, you sell liquor and alcohol, whatever you make, you got to figure out how to get to your customers in the most efficient way and the most reliable way. The biggest problem with markets is they worry. And markets factor into price, the chaos, the concerns, and those things about a market that makes them decide, how am I going to price that? When you think about crude oil, there's a lot of ways in which crude oil affects the economy, from the fertilizers we use to make the plants and the food and the vegetation to supply the world with its food. It comes in terms of logistics and travel and transportation. It comes with all the byproducts from the oil and gas that's produced in forms of LNG and crude oil and condensate. Plastic on this table, the shirt I'm wearing, the microphone I speak into, all derived from, transported by, manufactured, harvested, all from fossil fuel and crude oil and natural gas. When we think about the Strait of Hormuz being the jugular vein, well, that's today. Could there be another jugular vein sometime in the future? Absolutely. If you're not watching carefully the geopolitical risk today and what's going on between Ukraine and Russia, Russia's one of the leading producers of oil in the world. Vladimir Putin started the war almost 5 years ago with Ukraine. Ukraine has now perfected a low-cost retaliation and response, and now instead of being on defense, they're on offense. So here you have one of the largest producers in the world are watching bombs and refineries inside of Moscow being destroyed by long-range drones. Now, you don't think every other bad actor on the planet just realized we can now imitate and utilize that same technology, and we can access all kinds of refineries in the United States, in Canada, and other oil-producing countries. So today, the Strait of Hormuz is a jugular vein. What happens if you cut off other traditional routes? What if you go down and do things in Brazil or in Guyana or even here in the United States? What if there's just slight disruption that's created by very low-cost, disruptive tools such as drones? We have a whole new element of risk in global supply of oil and gas. And that is going to cause a lot of rise in the price of oil and gas over the next 10 to 20 years, purely because of what I just described. So I think about this like the way I think about hotels, right? Global crude oil consumers are like world travelers. They know where they want to go. They've kind of figured out how they're going to get there, and they kind of know what they're going to get at the end. I'm going to either stay in a Ritz-Carlton or I'm going to stay in a Motel 6. The one thing I also know is some people just have limited resources. So certain consumers in the world, let's say Costa Rica, that is a net importer, or you take other countries as net importers, very small countries with very low demand, but they have to have oil and gas to run their countries, diesel, jet fuel, electricity. And all of a sudden the price of oil goes up because these jugular veins, these points of constraint, continue to become a problem in the next 10, 20, 30 years. And all of a sudden what you have is you have now pitted the haves and the have-nots. You have certain end buyers of crude oil that are going to say up to a certain price, we can take the same amount of oil and gas and fossil fuels we have in the past. Or we got to create something like a nuclear plant. We got to create something like wind and solar. We got to find other ways to create energy because we don't have enough money in our economy down to the consumer level to pay $100, $110, $150 a barrel. I don't think it's going to be demand destruction. I think it's going to be a rotation in energy that's consumed. It's going to be a rotation in the haves and have-nots. And those who have really robust economies, they don't care what the cost. I don't care if it's $200 a barrel. They're going to buy it. Inside of that country, inside of that consumer, inside of that marketplace, you're going to have certain constituents inside of that country that say, I can't drive my car 5 days a week. I can't take a vacation. I can't buy a boat. But they're still going to be a consumer. So even if you have demand destruction, if you have limitation in supply because of disruption and chaos and geopolitical events, what you're going to find is less supply, higher price has the same kind of financial stress. What I would challenge you today is why the Strait of Hormuz is so important. It just gave the first warning sign that the greatest way to control the global economy is to constrain energy. And if you can constrain the flow of oil and natural gas and LNG across the globe, you can effectively disrupt entire global economies in a moment's notice. It took only less than 90 days for the whole world to figure out if the Strait of Hormuz is not flowing, if President Trump can't get a successful, executed, and meaningful MOU, if there can't be a true release of cargo ships and oil-bound vessels, Aframaxes coming through the Strait of Hormuz, and a complete establishment back to normalcy that we had 90 to 120 days ago, this will be an ongoing geopolitical risk that's going to be factored into the very content of producing a barrel of oil, no matter where it comes from in the world today. Strait of Hormuz, jugular vein? I think so.